For 20 years, Sarah Miller thought she'd found her blessing. A husband devoted to God, a marriage built on faith, a love she believed was divine. But one humid Florida night, she discovered something that shattered everything. A secret so impossible, it turned a wife into a killer. This is the story of a woman who believed she was living in truth, only to wake up trapped in a lie so deep it cost a man his life and a woman her soul. What she found under that bed didn't just end a marriage. It ended everything she thought she knew about love, faith, and the man she slept beside for 2 decades. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jacksonville, Florida, mid-2000s. A small church community where everyone knew everyone, and faith wasn't just a Sunday ritual, it was a way of life. At the center of it all stood Pastor Daniel Miller, a man with a voice like warm honey and a smile that could calm the stormiest soul. He quoted scripture with ease, prayed with conviction, and counseled couples on the sanctity of marriage. And beside him, always beside him, was his wife Sarah. She was the kind of woman who baked casseroles for sick neighbors, organized vacation Bible school, and never missed a single Sunday service. Together, they were the golden couple, the ones everyone aspired to be. The couple that prayed together, stayed together. That's what the congregation said. That's what Sarah believed. Their wedding photo hung in the church hallway. Daniel in a sharp suit, Sarah in lace, both of them glowing with the kind of love that looked eternal. People called them blessed, anointed even. For 20 years they lived under that blessing. 20 years of shared prayers, shared meals, shared vows. But even the holiest vows can hide unholy secrets, and this one, hidden for 2 decades, would soon explode with a violence no one saw coming. Sarah's first journal entry was written in 2009. She didn't write often, but when she did, the words were careful, measured, like she was afraid someone might read them. "I wonder if other wives feel this way," she wrote. "Distant, alone, like you're sharing a bed but living in separate worlds." She didn't tell anyone at first. How could she? Daniel was respected, loved, and she was his wife. Complaining felt like betrayal. But the distance wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Daniel avoided her touch. He'd turn away at night, claiming exhaustion from ministry work. When she'd try to initiate intimacy, he'd say he was stressed, that his health wasn't what it used to be. He blamed migraines, back pain, long hours counseling troubled marriages. Sarah believed him, or at least she tried to. She started questioning herself. Was she not attractive enough? Not spiritual enough? Maybe this was just what long marriages felt like. Quiet, polite, separate. But then there were the moments that didn't add up. Locked bathroom doors, strange deliveries from medical suppliers that Daniel would quickly hide, late-night phone calls he'd take in the garage, whispering in tones she couldn't quite hear. Once she found a package addressed to him, something from a pharmacy 2 towns over. When she asked, he said it was medication for a condition he didn't want to worry her about. "It's nothing serious," he said. "Just something I'm managing." She nodded. She trusted him. He was a man of God. Men of God don't lie, do they? But the confusion gnawed at her. Friends noticed she seemed withdrawn. One close friend, Linda, pulled her aside after a church potluck. "You okay, hun?" Linda asked. "You seem tired." Sarah forced a smile. "Just busy, you know, ministry life." Linda squeezed her hand. "If you ever need to talk." Sarah nodded, but she never did. How do you admit that your marriage, the one everyone admires, feels like a performance? How do you say that the man who preaches about intimacy and oneness avoids you like you're a stranger? So she kept quiet. She prayed harder. She told herself that love wasn't always passion. Sometimes it was patience. Sometimes it was endurance. And she endured. For years. Until one night, everything she endured crumbled into dust. June 15th, 2019. Sarah had been at a women's retreat upstate, 3 days of prayer and fellowship. She wasn't supposed to come home until Sunday afternoon, but she'd felt restless, uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. So she left early. She drove the 2 hours back to Jacksonville, the windows down, gospel music playing softly on the radio. She pulled into the driveway just after midnight. The house was dark except for a faint light in the bedroom. She assumed Daniel was reading, maybe preparing Sunday's sermon. She walked in quietly, not wanting to startle him. But when she opened the bedroom door, what she saw froze her in place. Daniel was there, but something was wrong. He was undressed, his back turned to her, and the way he moved, the way his body looked in the dim light, it didn't make sense. She called his name. He spun around, eyes wide, scrambling to cover himself. "Sarah, what are you doing home?" His voice cracked, panicked. She stepped closer, her heart pounding, and that's when she saw it. On the floor beside the bed, a prosthetic device, surgical adhesives, medical documents. She picked up one of the papers, her hands shaking. Gender reconstruction procedures. Incomplete transition. Medical history spanning back years, decades even, long before they'd ever met. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in 20 years, she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "What is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel's face crumpled. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Sarah, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That our entire marriage is a lie?" He was crying now, shaking his head. "I didn't lie. I couldn't tell you. You wouldn't have understood. You wouldn't have loved me." She stared at him, her mind racing, trying to piece together 20 years of moments that suddenly made horrible sense. The locked doors, the avoidance, the distance. "You let me think it was me," she said, her voice rising. "You let me think I wasn't enough, that I was the problem." "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Not after 20 years. Not after the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering what was wrong with her. Not after the shame, the self-doubt, the loneliness she'd carried in silence. She stood there, trembling, the document still in her hand. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Not just her heart, her entire sense of reality, the man she'd married, the life she'd built, the faith she'd clung to, all of it, shattered in an instant. And she didn't know if she'd ever be able to put the pieces back together. The days that followed were a blur. Sarah couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment of their marriage in her head, searching for clues she'd missed. And there were so many. Their first meeting at Bible study. Daniel had been charming, attentive, but he'd never pushed for physical closeness. She thought he was respectful, godly. Their engagement was quick, only 3 months. At the time, she thought it was romantic. Now she wondered if it was calculated. Their wedding night. He'd been nervous, distant. She'd assumed it was normal. First-time jitters. But there had been excuses even then. He'd claimed exhaustion, said they had their whole lives ahead of them. And she'd believed him. Over the years, there were hospital visits he'd explained away as complications from a missionary trip abroad. Surgeries he'd said were minor. Nothing to worry about. She'd never questioned it. She'd trusted him, loved him. And he'd used that trust to build a fortress of lies. The medical documents she'd found revealed the truth. Daniel had been born female. He'd started transitioning in his early 20s but never completed the process. He'd lived as a man, presented as a man, married as a man. But his body told a different story, one he'd hidden with prosthetics, careful clothing, and decades of deception. Sarah felt violated. Not just physically, though that was part of it, but spiritually, emotionally. She'd given him everything, her youth, her devotion, her body, her faith, and he'd given her nothing but lies. She stopped going to church. When friends called, she didn't answer. When Daniel tried to talk to her, she'd lock herself in the guest room. She started drinking wine at night, alone, staring at old photos and wondering how she could have been so blind. Meanwhile, Daniel continued preaching. Every Sunday he stood at that pulpit, talking about truth, about honesty, about the sanctity of marriage. And every Sunday, Sarah watched from home, her stomach turning. How could he stand there and preach about light while living in darkness? How could the congregation sit there, nodding, hanging on his every word, when the man they idolized was a fraud? She felt like she was going insane, like she was the only one who could see the truth. And maybe that's what pushed her over the edge, not just the betrayal, but the fact that he was still pretending, still performing, still lying, even to God. One night, she confronted him again. It was late, after midnight. She'd been drinking, and the anger that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over. "You need to tell them," she said, standing in the doorway of his office. He looked up from his sermon notes, startled. "Tell who?" "The church, the congregation, everyone. You need to tell them the truth." He shook his head. "Sarah, I can't do that. It would destroy everything." "It should destroy everything," she screamed. "You're a liar. You've been lying to me, to them, to God." He stood up, his face pale. "God forgave me. Why can't you?" She slapped him, hard. The sound echoed through the house. For a moment, they both just stood there, shocked. It was the first time in 20 years she'd ever raised a hand to him. And in that moment she realized something terrifying. She wanted to hurt him, not just emotionally, physically. She wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused her. And that realization scared her more than anything. Because Sarah Miller wasn't a violent person. She was a woman of faith, a woman of peace. But betrayal has a way of turning saints into something else entirely. The weeks that followed were a descent into darkness. Sarah stopped pretending. She stopped smiling. She stopped trying to hold it together. Friends described her as hollow, haunted, like the light had gone out of her eyes. Daniel, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. He filed for a restraining order, claiming Sarah had become unstable, but withdrew it days later, telling the judge it was a misunderstanding. "For the sake of the church," he said. For the sake of his image, Sarah thought. He couldn't afford a scandal. Not when his reputation was the only thing holding his world together. But Sarah's world had already collapsed. She spent her days wandering the house, picking up objects and trying to remember who she used to be. She'd sit in the kitchen, staring at the table where they'd shared thousands of meals, and wonder how many of those smiles had been real, how many of those prayers had been lies. At night she'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment she'd found those documents, over and over, until the image was burned into her mind. She started having violent thoughts, intrusive, terrifying thoughts that she couldn't control. What if she just ended it? What if she made him disappear? What if she erased the lie that had become her life? She hated herself for thinking it, prayed for forgiveness, begged God to take the anger away. But it didn't leave. It grew, festered, until it became the only thing she could feel. One evening, a storm rolled through Jacksonville. Thunder shook the house. Rain pounded against the windows. Sarah sat in the dark living room, a glass of wine in her hand, watching the lightning flash across the sky. Daniel was in the kitchen, making tea, humming a hymn. The sound of his voice, so calm, so unbothered, made her stomach turn. She stood up, walked into the kitchen, and just stared at him. He turned, startled. "Sarah, you okay?" She didn't answer, just looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, she didn't see her husband. She saw a stranger, a liar, a man who'd stolen 20 years of her life and felt no remorse. "You ruined me," she said quietly. He set the kettle down, his expression softening. "Sarah, please, we can work through this. We can get counseling. We can—" "You ruined me," she repeated, louder this time. I gave you everything, and you gave me nothing but lies." He took a step toward her, and she flinched. "Don't touch me." He stopped, hands raised. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't give me back 20 years. Her voice cracked. "Sorry doesn't give me back my life." And then, before she even realized what she was doing, she reached for the knife block on the counter. The 911 call came in at 11:47 p.m. A neighbor reported shouting from the Miller residence, loud, desperate shouting, a woman's voice screaming, "You lied to me for 20 years." When the police arrived, the front door was unlocked. The house was eerily quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain against the roof. They called out, no response. They moved through the house, cautiously, hands on their holsters. And then they found him. Pastor Daniel Miller, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. And sitting on the floor beside him, her back against the cabinet, was Sarah. Her hands were covered in blood. The knife lay on the floor beside her. She looked up at the officers, her face blank, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's done," she whispered. "He can't lie anymore." They asked her to stand. She didn't resist, didn't say a word. Just let them cuff her, lead her out of the house, past the neighbors who'd gathered on the lawn, their faces shocked, horrified. The woman who'd baked them casseroles, the woman who'd smiled at them every Sunday, now a killer. The rain had stopped, the sky was clear, and as they put her in the back of the police car, Sarah looked up at the stars and felt nothing. No relief, no regret, just emptiness. Because the truth had finally been told, and it had cost everything. The investigation moved quickly. Police searched the house and found everything: the prosthetics, the medical documents, the surgical adhesives. Daniel's secret, hidden for decades, was now public knowledge. The media exploded. Headlines screamed across the nation. Florida pastor's wife kills husband over gender secret. Woman murders husband after discovering 20-year lie. The church community was torn apart. Some members defended Daniel, saying his past didn't define his ministry. Others felt betrayed, lied to, manipulated. Sunday services became battlegrounds of opinion. Attendance dropped. Families left. The church that had once been a beacon of faith became a symbol of scandal. Sarah's supporters called her a victim, a woman driven to madness by prolonged psychological abuse. Others called her a cold-blooded killer, a woman who'd taken a life instead of walking away. Her interrogation tape was leaked to the press. In it, Sarah sat across from two detectives, her hands folded in her lap, her voice flat. "He fooled me," she said. "Fooled God, fooled everyone. For 20 years I was married to a lie." "Why didn't you leave?" one detective asked. She looked up, eyes red and hollow. "Because I believed in my vows. I believed in him. I believed in love." "So why did you kill him?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then softly she said, "Because he took my choice away. He decided for me who I'd spend my life with, and when I finally found out, it was too late. 20 years, too late." The detectives exchanged glances. One leaned forward. "Do you regret it?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I regret that I ever met him." The video went viral, millions of views, endless debates. Was she justified? Was it self-defense? Was it revenge? Psychologists weighed in, discussing the effects of prolonged deception on mental health. Legal experts debated whether this could be considered a crime of passion or premeditated murder. And through it all, Sarah sat in a cell, silent, waiting for judgment. The trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed: reporters, supporters, protesters, people who'd never met Sarah but felt they knew her story. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by rage. They argued that she'd had time to leave, time to process, time to choose a different path. But instead, She'd chosen violence. This was not an act of desperation, the prosecutor said. This was revenge, cold, calculated, murder. The defense told a different story. They brought in expert witnesses, psychologists who testified about the psychological trauma caused by prolonged deception, the erosion of trust, the collapse of identity. Sarah Miller didn't just lose a husband, her lawyer argued. She lost herself. For 20 years, she lived in a reality that didn't exist, and when that reality shattered, so did she. The courtroom watched Sarah's taped confession, the moment when she said, her voice breaking, "He took my choice away." There were gasps, whispers. Some jurors wiped their eyes. The defense called Sarah to the stand. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked small, fragile, broken. "Do you remember stabbing your husband?" her lawyer asked. Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes." "Can you tell the court what you were feeling in that moment?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I felt like I was drowning, like I'd been underwater for 20 years, and he'd been holding me down. And in that moment I wanted to breathe." The courtroom was silent. "I didn't plan it," she continued. "I didn't wake up that day thinking I was going to kill him, but when I saw him standing there, so calm, so unbothered, like none of it mattered, I just snapped." "Do you regret it?" She looked at the jury, tears streaming down her face. "I regret that it came to that, but I don't regret being free." The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. "We find the defendant, Sarah Miller, guilty of voluntary manslaughter." Not murder. Manslaughter. Due to diminished capacity, the judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 8. Sarah didn't react, just nodded, stood, and let them lead her away. Outside the courthouse, reactions were mixed. Some cheered, believing justice had been served. Others protested, holding signs that read, "Free Sarah" and "Victim not killer." The church Daniel had led never recovered. Attendance dwindled. The building was eventually sold. His sermons, once archived online, were scrubbed from the internet. His legacy erased. Sarah, meanwhile, began her sentence. She wrote letters from prison, reflections on faith, forgiveness, and truth. She sent one to a reporter who'd covered her trial. It read, "I thought I was living a holy life. I thought faith meant trust. But faith without truth is just blindness. And I was blind for 20 years. I don't know if God has forgiven me. I don't know if I've forgiven myself. But I know this. Secrets destroy. They poison everything they touch. And sometimes when the poison runs too deep, there's no cure, only consequence." Sarah Miller believed she was living a holy life, until holiness turned to horror. For 20 years, love and lies slept side by side, and when truth finally woke her, it demanded blood. This story isn't just about a murder. It's about the cost of deception, the weight of betrayal, and the question we all have to ask ourselves: what would you do if the person you loved most turned out to be someone you never knew at all? Would you walk away? Or would you, like Sarah, break under the weight of it all? Think about it. 20 years. 20 years of believing in something that wasn't real. 20 years of giving your heart to someone who was hiding theirs. How do you recover from that? How do you move forward when your entire foundation was built on lies? Sarah couldn't. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not just that she took a life, but that hers was already gone long before that night in the kitchen. What do you think? Was Sarah a victim of betrayal who finally broke? Or did she take a life that could have been saved by forgiveness? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps us continue sharing the hidden, heartbreaking stories that reveal the fragile line between faith and deception, love and destruction. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell the people we love. And sometimes the truth comes too late to save anyone.